seems to me like what is crazy and what's normal, right? Is it crazy to be radically truthful and radically transparent with each other, to say what you mean, to work it through, and to know that there's none of that games playing? Isn't it more efficient? And isn't it more straightforward? Why? It's a psychological barrier. Most people have a psychological barrier. Psychologists and neuroscientists tell me that it's because of how the brain is wired. That there's a part of our brain called the amygdala. And when we have a disagreement, there's an inclination to think that that's a fight rather than a curiosity, okay? And so that tends to cause it. And it's also how we're raised. You know, from a very early age, the whole idea of being right is so rewarded, whereas learning from mistakes doesn't have its place, right? So a kid studies, oh, you're smart, 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 you take the examination, and okay, you do badly, but life's not like that. Life is mostly a matter of making your mistakes and knowing how to evolve past those mistakes and learn.
Ray, this is your book. I read your book. It's provocative at the very least. It's full of great ideas. It's the one place where I found them in one place. Why'd you write it?
Because these principles, everything that I learned, is in the book. I'm at a stage in my life in which I'm transitioning from what I'll call the second stage of my life, which is when one tries to be successful and others are dependent on oneself, to the third stage in life, in which the greatest joy that I can have is to watch other people be successful. And over these years, I accumulated a bunch of principles that helped me be successful, and I just wanted to pass them along. They were built over many years at Bridgewater because I was making decisions and I was reflecting on them, and I wanted to pass them along.
It's unusual, at the very least, for someone in your position, someone managing $160 billion of investments, someone helping to run a company of Bridgewater's size, to write a book like this. How did you find the time?
Well, you know, I've been writing these principles down for, 20 years, because I got in the habit, which is a habit, by the way, I'd recommend to you or anybody else, to, whenever I was faced with a decision, to think, what are my criteria for making those decisions, and then to write them down. Because the same things happen to us over and over again, right? And so, particularly if I'm making mistakes and learning, it was a good exercise. And then eventually I put some of these things into algorithms to make our investment process. So I found that over the period of time I accumulated those principles. And then I didn't feel good about putting the principles out, generally speaking, but in 2008, when we caught the financial crisis and we got attention, some people gave us attention and I didn't want the attention, but I felt that it wasn't understood, the principles of our company that have made us successful. And so I put them out on a website, and they were downloaded 3 million times. And I received all sorts of thank you notes because people found them helpful. And then the time came where I thought, I now gather all these together, and in my transition from that second phase to the third phase, I wanted to put it out. So that's how they developed. And so you'd say, how long did it take to write the book? I don't know. It took a long time to get the principles. It took a lifetime of trial and error. The thing about it that I was reluctant to write that personal part, because I don't want people to pay attention to me or somebody's story. They make it too, okay, this is Ray Dalio's story. I'd like people to look through those principles, through me, to the principles, and say that the principles themselves make sense.
So if in fact that's what happens, people read your story, find it interesting, but look through it ultimately to your life principles and your work principles, what do you hope to accomplish?
Well, I just hope that people will assess those principles and see, are they useful? I hope that they will form their own principles. What principles work for them?
Is that the most important part?
Oh, that's the most important part. In other words, there's a certain power of having principles that suit you and that and that you can clearly communicate. And I think that that's true today. In other words, what does it mean to be principled? Did you articulate your principles? Are you clear? Are you straight? Can you walk the talk? Today in our society, I hope that it will encourage people to be more principled. So I'm encouraging other people to put out their principles. I won't give you the names, but I spoke to a number of other people, and I want them to put out their principles. Because I think when I look back, wouldn't I have liked to know what Albert Einstein's principles were, or Steve Jobs? What were the recipes that led to their successes? What were they going after? And if we had everybody write their principles down and you could look at it, those are sort of recipes. Wouldn't it be nice to have everybody's recipes? Because I could have learned from other people's recipes.
You describe systems and processes, even companies and economies for that matter, as machines. Machines is an unusual word. Why machines?
Well, I think that to think of it, the human body as a gorgeous machine. It's like our brains as gorgeous machines. It shows that how they develop, how they have cause-effect relationships. And I think the whole ecosystem is a machine. When we start to think about that, we can think about how do we interact with the machine? How do we influence the machine? How do we make the machine work for us? So I'm talking about reality. Okay, there are three things you need to do in order to be successful, right? I mean, well, most importantly, you have to know what the best decisions are, and then you have to have the courage to make them. And so when you look at those choices that you have to be able to deal with reality. And if you just view it as a machine and not something that's happening to you that you don't own, I think it helps give you a psychology. It helped me. You know, cause-effect relationship. How does this machine work? Bridgewater is an idea meritocracy in which the goal is to have meaningful work and meaningful relationships, and to do that through radical truthfulness and radical transparency. So, okay, idea meritocracy. The best ideas win out. Meaningful work. You're on a mission together. You have impact. Meaningful relationships. In other words, like an extended family. That power of being in it together and realizing that the reward of the relationship is just as great as the reward of the success of the business. But to do that by having radical truthfulness. In other words, that you can say what you believe and I can say what I believe, and that we can have processes in place to have thoughtful disagreement, to get past our disagreements. And that radical transparency is the ability for people to see everything so that they don't have second-hand or third-hand stories. I mean, to me, when I look at a company, most companies, it looks disingenuous. And all the stuff that goes on behind the scenes, people don't say what they really think. There's all of the office politics. They don't know what the real story is because there's so much spin. Imagine if you can get to see everything. And it's fantastic when you have independent thinkers. In order to be successful in the markets or as an entrepreneur, one has to be an independent thinker that makes decisions better than the consensus decisions.
It's fair.
In the markets, the consensus is built into the price.
It's beta.
Yeah. So now you have to bet against the consensus to make money. Therefore, you have to be an independent thinker. The best dynamic is to have a bunch of independent thinkers. Now you've got a bunch of independent thinkers. How are they going to have thoughtful disagreement and get past those disagreements? How we have done that is the key to our success. One by one, and you could say, does that piece make sense? Isn't it sensible to have an idea meritocracy where the best ideas win out? Okay, now, what are the rules of the game to achieve that?
That's what it's all
Isn't that
about.
better?
Well, if you want to get to the idea meritocracy, you've got to have a way of getting there.
Right. If you want to get to the best answer, it's not going to be in your head. I think one of the greatest tragedies of mankind is that people stubbornly have wrong opinions in their head that they could easily stress test and get to better opinions collectively if they could be forthright with each other and go through the processes I outline in the book. And the reason, and they have to have humility. I learned the fear of being wrong. I'm fearful of being wrong. And I've had the opportunity to get to know the most remarkable, successful people in the world. And they have all gone through the mistake making and the learning from that. It's the learning that comes from mistakes that makes people more successful than knowing the right answers. And yet we have those kinds of barriers. So the key to our success has been, I don't mean to lecture, but I do mean to pass along what has been the keys of our success. I think I learned at a very, many years ago, that almost anything that I think, I can computerize the criteria for making decisions. By the way, that would be one of the greatest gifts I can give people, is the understanding of when you're thinking, I'm making a decision. Now slow up and think, what are the criteria? Write those criteria down. You can put those criteria into equations, because the brain is 89 billion neurons, which are little computers, and then it gets input from the outside. Well, what your brain is doing, can in many ways be done better by the computer if you go through that exercise. So, I have a saying, if you're not worried, you need to worry. And if you're worried, you don't need to worry. Because if you worry about things, then you take care of those things. Everything that I know about life and work is in that book.